Hello, dear colleagues and guests. My name is Galina Bleikh. I am an artist and curator. I am also the host of Laser Talk Jerusalem and co-chair of INEMEA Association for Arts, Culture and Education. First of all, I want to thank Leonardo Laser Talks for this opportunity, as well as CYLAND and Adam for collaborating with us on this talk. Our talk explores the evolving landscape and future prospects of generative art, focusing on the intricate interplay between human creativity and mathematical algorithms. We'll showcase works that approach this field from diverse and unexpected angles. By delving into these innovative perspectives, we aim to deepen our understanding of generative art's potential to reshape our world and push the boundaries of artistic expression. Perhaps the main difference between generative art and traditional art is this. Each project literally creates itself. The human creator initiates a process. This could be a program or equation. Then, after a certain number of cycles, something unique appears. Generative art became a full-fledged direction in modern art in the 90s, 60s, and 70s. This happened with the advent of first computers and programming. Today, of course, most generative art is created using computers and even AI. At the core of each such project is an autonomous system. Its working process determines that the final product will be. For example, it could be a mathematical equation, or it might involve some elements of randomness. It could use physical laws or machine learning, and so on. Now, allow me to quote Lev Manovich here, a respected speaker from our previous session. In his article, Make It New, Gen AI, Modernism and Database Art, he writes, most of the millions of everyday people and creative professionals who employ generative media tools use them as is and don't customize them further. This may change in the future as fine-tuning these tools to follow our aesthetic preferences becomes more commonplace. But regardless of these specifics, all newly created cultural artifacts produced by generative AI have a common logic. Today, we will present 3 projects. Each of them explores the theme of generative art from different and quite unexpected angles. The diverse approach indicates that this art form actively developing, incorporating more and more new aspects of our reality. And now, I hand over to our moderator, Daria Kesler, who will introduce our speakers for today. And Daria, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about yourself also.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay,
thank you. So I took the chair. Hello, I'm really glad to be here today. As Galina mentioned, my name is Daria, and today I'm going to be moderating the whole process. I'm a cross-disciplinary researcher and artist. I have a master's degree in art and science, hybrid art. I'm currently working with the topic of empathy towards all kinds of species, living and non-living, human and unhuman agents. So I think it's enough about me, and I'm going to be really happy to introduce you our third speaker, Nimrod Asterhan. Nimrod is an artist, technologist, and educator, working in sculpture, digital media. They exhibited and initiated group projects in Europe, the USA, and the international space station. Recent showings of Nimrod include the Guangzhou Biennale Pavilion Project, Ars Electronica, the Ammerman Center Biennale Symposium on Art and Technology. And also I would like to say that last year they received grants and awards from the Municipal Art League of Chicago and the Art, Science and Culture Initiative at the University of Chicago, among others. Nimrod holds an MFA in Art Technology Studies from a school, the Art Institute of Chicago. They taught digital art, code, hardware, and critical theory at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, China Academy of Art, and Shankar College of Engineering, Art, and Design. And he's currently based in Israel. And please, the chair is yours.
Thank you so much, Nasha, for the introduction. I took over the chair. Hello, everyone, and everyone connected at home. Please kindly allow me a moment to get set up here before I begin the presentation. I promise you that I will be much more eloquent with my notes, so that will just take a slight moment. Thank you for your patience. So yeah, thank you again, and thank you, Galina, for the introduction and the invitation, and hello everyone once again. So I'm very happy to be here today and to speak to you all about generative art and elemental media, and the different ways, shapes, and forms that I think with and about them in my practice. I'm also really looking forward to the speakers today, for the Open Guy and Lilia Chak, to learn more about their work, and I'm sure we will have a great conversation afterwards. One of the aims for me of discussing the elemental entanglements of generative art is to show how it is not separate from its material, labor, and social conditions. And as such, particularly within the media and technology fields, it is inextricably tied to histories of oppression, extraction, colonialization, and war. My work at times attempts to be an act of revealing such ties. So I would like to therefore acknowledge the context in which this talk is being given. I've been devastated, as many of you, by the horrific events of the latest war, and the world is reeling from this country's unprecedented onslaught on Gaza, inflicting mass devastation and death upon besieged Palestinians, as well as the atrocious attacks and kidnapping by Hamas in Israel on October 7th. The recent escalation is, of course, immensely concerning in this context, and my heart is with all the people and communities facing this violence. And I remain hopeful that the consequences of revelation and acknowledgement are beneficial for artists and scholars to stand against all forms of racism and oppression, and support and encourage de-escalation, dialogue, and a lasting peace. With that, I'm going to go ahead and start by showing how entangled perhaps generative art can be. So the first work I would like to share is called Total Reflection. The work is made of steel rail, often used to carry cables inside industrial buildings. You can see it kind of above the ceiling in certain arrangements. It has sculptural elements made of epoxy casts with LED inserts, and an electronic mechanism reacting to internet activity and its proximity. The work results from research and inquiry into the aesthetics of infrastructures, specifically those related to digital media. I want to offer a glimpse into that research. So coming from a sculptural practice, I started thinking about the materiality of internet infrastructure, and specifically fiber optic cables. I was looking to find one plausible answer to this question of what does the internet look like? What is it made of? Fiber optic cables use light-based signaling for communication, carrying signals between countries, continents, and cities. I was tracing back the basic physical principles that allow light to travel through the winding path of a cable. The scientific discovery allowed the emergence of this infrastructure used to carry information quickly and efficiently. So light traveling through fiber optic cables is what allows us to actually watch videos, share photos, and perform many other aspects of our increasingly data-rich and media-saturated lives. And the phenomenon of light carried through a transparent medium like water or glass without losing power is called total internal reflection. At specific angles, light reflects internally within a transparent medium rather than passing through it. The same phenomenon that makes aquariums sometimes look like mirrors when you look at them at certain angles. The scientist who discovered this phenomenon was called Jean-Daniel Colladon, And he found it by trying to demonstrate water coming out of a container on his lab table, someone keen to the image we see here on the right. So while trying to establish how water flowing out of holes creates different curvatures due to varying pressure levels, he realized his students couldn't see the water since they were transparent. So he put this little flashlight inside the container and witnessed the light carrying through the curvature of the water. And you can see this more clearly with the laser example on the left. This was the 1800s. And before being utilized for any kind of scientific or engineering purpose, this discovery was harnessed to produce spectacular aesthetics and was actually used in Victorian fountain lighting systems, like, for example, Agam's Light and Fire and Water, kinetic sculpture in Dizengoff Square. At the same time, this same phenomenon was used in these cables that are actually buried underneath the ground and at the bottom of the ocean, and the actual material and physical appearance of them is obscured from plain sight, right? None of us knows what a fiber optic cable looks like, or maybe some of you do, but most people don't, and most people also have never seen one. So total reflection visualizes, reactively shows, and gets activated by internet activity in its proximity. Whenever you use your phone beside it, it gets activated and flickers according to data your phone uses. When there is no significant transmission, the work is silent, kind of sleeping. And then, as an example, when you open Instagram, a very data-rich application, it downloads a lot of data and the work reacts to it. So the work taps into this invisible electromagnetic environment of telecommunication frequencies used for wireless communication and brings those into the sensible, allowing us to experience them. Materially, I traced the actual shape and form of the fiber optic cable. So the work was first commissioned for a show called Tubes that dealt with questions of infrastructures, invisible hierarchies, and power, and how these intersect. A reason for demonstrating this work using Instagram is also to show how this aesthetic phenomenon of flickering light is not only hidden from plain sight, but also what enables the veneer of polished web interfaces and social networks. So one form of abstraction and obfuscation leads to another form of abstraction and obfuscation of authentic private lives through social media. I produced these tubes that you can see in the picture here, reminiscent of a section of a fiber optic cable. The transparent tube sections or rods were cast with LEDs embedded in them. And another important aspect was to show that as I'm thinking about this work as a form of revealing, as I work in this way that produces relationships with unseen hierarchies and structures, I didn't want to conceal its mechanisms and the way it operates. So the work was always shown in this and other shows with the bare mechanisms that power it. I mean, you see a picture of it here. I was raised in an artistic tradition where aesthetics and ethics are inseparable. So as a materialist and as someone interested in how these materials work and affect our bodies and environments, I found it crucial to keep the mechanism open and visible. I continued thinking about the physicality of electromagnetic frequencies and the way they propagate, fill up space, and interact with bodies. And I arrived to Chicago. And being there, I was mesmerized by the city's history as a pivotal point in the United States. So it's a city from which infrastructures of railroads, electric power grids, and telegraph communication was sprawling westwards during the West expansion. And this was the first time that I was working in a place where the material environment for creating these infrastructures was so close to me. So I was really interested in creating works that use radio waves and react to bodies as diptychs of transmitters and receivers, and I wanted to work with the material environment in my surrounding to build those. Between the poles, the work we see here is made of Indiana glass as the surface of this electronic mechanism. And this glass has a slight bluish green tint, reminiscent of the high iron content inside the sand used to create it, such as the one that can be found in Indiana Dunes. So you can actually trace the aesthetics of the object into kind of its material or its chemical composition. And another example is copper, the same type that is drawn from or extracted from Michigan open copper mines that were used to create cables for telegraph communication. And the glass was used to insulate these same telegraph poles. So you always had the kind of train line and the telegraph poles right beside it. And you can see in the picture, or hopefully you can see that to the level of the nails, everything is made of either copper or glass. So it reveals the materiality and relationship between these digital media devices and their earthly material origins. It connects resource extraction and labor to these devices that are otherwise considered abstract, opaque, and obfuscated, or existing in an abstract realm of computation, detached from material reality. What the work ends up doing is it creates a small network. So you can think about it as kind of like a free Wi-Fi network that is only based on radio signals. Again, bringing that into some way of sensing and creating a physical encounter with these energies and frequencies. So the way it was done was through this generative drawing that delineates a sine wave being sent from one device to the other. So this glass plate is actually an antenna that transmits a frequency that gets picked up by the second part of the work, and which displays it on this kind of little display. And I'm interested in looking at or thinking about how even in this proximity, even when they are so close to each other, there are so many disturbances affecting the transmission, whether it's bodies of people inside the room or other electronic devices in the proximity, or the camera taking this particular video, or other devices around, and electricity, of course, interferes with it as well. So what you see is actually a generative drawing, and it's a drawing of the signal, but also of the noise. So also the thing that is outside the signal that it's trying to pick up and normally considered kind of insignificant, the negative space of a communication signal. If the transmission would have been picked up perfectly, you would see just a delineation of a sine waveform, so a symmetric kind of squiggle. But more often than not, and as you can see in the video, and as it always was when it was on display, as soon as a body walks into the space, something happens and distorts the signal and kind of creates a variation in the drawing. And again, in my own kind of context in Chicago, and many people around me in the context I was in, I encountered much more work that was using high-end graphics and industry-grade 3D animation. And in thinking about those kind of pristine, high-end computer graphics, I became very interested in the interrelation between the sleek, smooth, realistic graphics it is able to produce and the resulting energy expenditure in electricity dedicated to powering graphic computation. I was specifically interested in how computers need to work harder to render specific types of effects, making an energetic happening on the screen affect the actual physical energy the computer uses. And for those of you making 3D animation, you can even hear it because you hear the fans turning on when you are dealing with complex effects. So I started thinking about this work. It's called Between the Poles #2. I modeled an installation that demonstrates this principle by kind of lighting up the inside of a computer whenever a lightning appears in a computer-generated simulation. Striving to further entangle the work with its physical environment, I then conceived of an actual lightning detector antenna that will be informing the appearance of lightning on screen. So you see lightning gets picked up by the lightning rod, it kind of lights up a lightning on the screen, which kind of lights up the computer, both metaphorically and practically. So it does actually take more computation to render a lightning on screen, and it's also kind of poetically expressed in the work. The resulting installation comprises of 3 different elements. One is a lightning rod retrofitted to act as an antenna, and this antenna is connected through a lightning to USB interface that I created to the computer and sends a signal whenever there is a lightning strike or an electromagnetic disturbance akin to lightning in its proximity. So it's kind of tuned to a particular frequency in which lightning is particularly active, but it picks up, again, other disturbances that are elemental and always occur. The signal is then used to both display lightning on the screen as well as light up the internals of the computer as if lightning had hit the computer itself. The displayed simulation includes a landscape simulating lightning strikes near and far from the point of view of the viewer. The way it was installed here in the Cunning Art Center, a part of the Ammerman Center Biennial for Art and Technology, I was able to install the lightning rod outside with the screen and computer inside, creating a drawing with the cable connecting both parts. So you can physically trace this metaphoric relationship with your body by following the cable from either direction. The work was installed with the screen underneath the podium on top of which the computer was placed, celebrating the material conditions necessary for the creation of the intricate computer graphics rather than the effect in and of itself. So the computer is what is on the podium. And this is a studio install of the same work, so you can kind of see it all in one view. Yussi Parika, renowned media archaeologist, said, "Mapping the Earth as our geophysical underground is one of sensitive bodies, but also the technical and audiovisual culture in which the Earth is circuited as a part of mediatized expression." Thinking more about sensing earthly phenomena, I'm moving on to the next work called Earth Signal Universe-Wide. It involves electromagnetic energy's sculptural and performative potential as an invisible, yet ever physical, elemental artistic medium. Earth Signal Universe-Wide is a radio sculpture conceived as a transmission performed through several earthbound stations and on board the International Space Station. Radio waves dissipate and behave differently in different environmental conditions. So radio transmissions on Earth get dampened by atmospheric conditions and eventually disappear. We all experienced driving out of range of a beloved radio station. In outer space, though, radio waves never lose their energy. So as they expand from the locus of transmission on board the International Space Station, they get refracted by celestial objects within our social system or solar system and beyond it, flowing at the speed of light, traveling through the vacuum of space as they expand onwards and away ad infinitum. The signal itself, the transmission, carried live information about seismographic vibrations under the Syrio-African Depression, the lowest point on Earth's crust where humans roam. I was thinking about these signals as being the heartbeat of Earth's ringing as if it was a bell, the kind of slight vibrations. And the work traces this distance between the lowest points where humans roam to the kind of tallest point above the Earth, the International Space Station, where humans stay. Earth Signal Universe-Wide is thus an open-ended electromagnetic impasto, a living sculpture of Earth, from Earth, outside of Earth, and beyond the purview of Earth's inhabitants, so none of us can see it. The transmission was orchestrated through the interplanetary internet, making Earth Signal Universe-Wide, as far as I know, the first net art piece deployed on it. Seismic information was accessed by a custom-built web interface, made accessible for use through the interplanetary internet for one user alone. The website I created was allow listed on the NASA firewall. Indeed, astronaut Eitan Stiba was able to use this web interface to initiate the transmission in April of 2022. It lasted precisely 90 minutes, the time it takes the International Space Station to circle around the Earth exactly once. In addition to the actual performance or activation of the transmission, I created a 3D simulation that showed the way in which this transmission would look like if we were able to see it. So again, bringing into the possibility of physical encounter, but not through the logic of representation or visualization, but rather through the logic of simulation. So recreating the original effect in computational means. Any activation of the transmission within this 3D simulation would incur a different effect, and it will generatively look different depending on the location of different stellar artifacts, forces, planets, and gravitational fields. So the composition of the planets around the sun in the simulation is actually synchronized to our clock and represents the current state of positioning of the stars. What we can see in the video is the transmission as it starts, expands, gets refracted and reflected off of celestial bodies, and infinitely expands onwards and away to the edges of the width of the universe at some point. Theoretically impossible points. And this is an installation of the simulation in the Paris Center for Peace as a part of a space symposium dedicated to the Rakia mission. And this is another shot of the simulation and several posters at the Impossible Objects exhibition at the Gwangju Media Art Platform, a part of the prominent Guangzhou biennial. This work and other works in the past and future were made in collaboration with Toyster. The simulation is actually available online, so I invite you to check it out. And once again, thank you all for connecting, and thank you all here.
Thank you. It was really interesting and poetic. Thank you. So now I'm going to tell you a few words about our second speaker, Bleikh. Bleikh is an artist, designer, and science art researcher. She works in new media art, bio art, science art, digital art, video art. She works with installation, with conceptual art. Also, she works with artificial intelligence and net art. And 2 years ago, in 2022, she defended her PhD thesis in Sorbonne University at Paris at Art and Science Department. She's the author of the book Contemporary Practices in Bioart, When a Tree Becomes an Artwork. And her book were published at Cambridge Scholars Publishing a year ago. Bleikh took part in science art exhibition all over the world. I'd love to mention Art Selectorium in Vienna. For example, Matsuda International Science Art Festival in Tokyo and Museo Arte Botanica in Italy. And there are many, many more. And now I'm really happy to give the chair and to share it with Bleikh. Thank you.
Thank you. I will speak about my coding project. I had started working on the Pute coding series in 2024. While studying ancient Jewish poetic works, I discovered a whole series of wonderful song verses written by poets and at different times in different countries of the Jewish diaspora. Why did I combine them into a single series? These poems share a mystical and esoteric perspective on existence, and they all employ acrostic composition. I am intrigued by the idea of merging modern technology with medieval poetry, an era when cultural heritage was shaped by the limitation of reproduction, making each performance a unique and real-time experience. That's why I choose the opportunities that generative art provides. The movement of words creates a unique choreography for writing an acrostic each time the program is launched. Thus, each animation scene exists only in a single copy. You can see here a process of coding. Each work is the result of code execution and does not imply the preservation of an unchanged image or video. The innovation of this project lies in the fact that it changed the roles and ideas created decades earlier in the new coded reality. The artificial, which is represented in the work by computer code, behaves like a living organism, changing the structure of animation and video every time it starts. At the same time, the recording of live voice and music always remains unchanged. In this way, we can note a change in previously established ideas. All animation scenes are drawn with a specific color, which together creates a multicolored rainbow of the work. The music reflects a diverse palette of ancient and modern Jewish melodies. Spectators will hear Sephardic and Ashkenazi performances of poetic works. The program for all parts was coded by Alex Chuck, programmer. The musical performance of all poems is in the public domain. This is my first work, part of the theme, Yanrik on coding. Yaribon coding, the most high in the king of the world, is based on the text of the famous Shabbat hymn of Rabbi Israel ben Moses Najjara, glorifying the one creator. Israel ben Moses Najjara was a famous Jewish liturgical poet, preacher, biblical commentator, Kabbalist, and subsequently rabbi of the city of Gaza. The book Zmerot Israel, originally called Zmerot Israel Najjara, was first published in Tzfat and contained 108 poetim and hymns. Yaribon is a famous hymn included in this book of poems. Each verse of the Yaribon begins with a Hebrew letter forming the acrostic word Israel. The red strings in the video connect the letters of the acrostic and draw a complex graphic system reminiscent of transparent crystals. The red color for the strings was chosen according to ancient Jewish tradition as a symbol of strength and heroism. This is a fragment of my work, Pnei Aleinu coding, second part. Pnei Aleinu coding shown as your mercy is based on the text of the famous piyut Frich Bat Yosef. Frich Bat Yosef, also known as Frich Bat Rabbi Avraham, was an 18th century poet. She was born in Morocco, moved with her family to Algeria and then to Tunisia. Frich is unique for her time as a woman poet. Her poetry intertwines the personal destiny and history of the people of Israel, the history of exile and the desire for redemption. Since the publication of Professor Yosef Shetrit, who discovered her magnificent poetry, Frich Bat Yosef's work has become a source of inspiration for poets, artists, and musicians. The hymn Pnei Aleinu is a request to the Almighty for the unification of the Jewish people. Each verse of this hymn begins with a Hebrew letter forming an acrostic, the word of Frich. Yellow or golden polyhedrons connect the letters acrostic and draw a complex graphic system reminiscent of rising sun or a dandelion flower, inside of which there is an endless cave tunnel. This is Atzula Lifanim coding. Atzula Lifanim coding, through nobility, is based on the text of the famous poem by Rabbi Avraham ben Ezra. Avraham ben Ezra was a famous scientist, philosopher, and rabbi who was one of the founders of Hebrew grammar. The first two verses of the hymn, Atzula Lifanim, praise the Torah, and the subline ones bless the bridegroom of the Torah, the reader who has the honor of reading its last section, completing the cycle of reading the Torah for this year. Atzula Lifanim by Avraham ben Ezra was recorded by Yemenite Jews in the prayer book, the Halal. The song is performed at night on the holidays of Shavuot and Simchat Torah. Atzula Lifanim refers to the type of nashid, one of the types of piyut in the Yemenite Jewish tradition built on the principles of classical Arabic qasida. Each verse of the hymn begins with a Hebrew letter forming an acrostic, the word Abraham. Yellow lines connect the letters acrostic and draw a complex graphic system reminiscent desert landscape. Next work, the Yedidia Shahakta coding. Yedidia Shahakta coding, My Love, Have You Forgotten, is based on the text of a famous poem by Rabbi Yehuda Levi. Yehuda ben Shmuel Levi was a famous medieval Jewish poet and philosopher. Yedidia Shahakta is one of the central hymns in the tradition of Jews from the community of around Suba, Iraq, and Morocco. It is performed on the 7th day of Passover, on Saturday evening, and weddings. Yedidia Shahakta is characterized by sensual and erotic description of love relationships. Scholars and Torah commentators agree that, like the description of love in the Book of Songs, An allegory of the text describes the relationship between the Creator and the people of Israel. Each verse of this hymn begins with a Hebrew letter forming an acrostic, the word Yehuda. Green color in Jewish tradition is a symbol of fertility, renewal, and femininity. The green polyhedrons in the video connect the letters of the acrostics and drew a complex graphic system that resembles a growing fantastic tree. This is Shefat Revivim coding. Shefat Revivim coding, abundance of rainfall, is based on the text of Ibn Gvirol's famous poem from the book Tikkun HaGeshem. Rabbi Shlomo ben Yehuda Ibn Gvirol, also known as Ibn Gvirol, was a Spanish Jewish philosopher and poet who lived in the 11th century. Tikkun HaGeshem is one of his books of poetry. This collection of poems is part of Ibn Gvirol's wider oeuvre, which includes philosophical treatises, religious poetry, and writing on ethics. Tikkun HaGeshem is especially known for its spiritual, mystical themes, often exploring the relationship between humanity and the divine. In Ibn Gvirol's hymn Shefat Revivim, streams of rain are a symbol of salvation. Each verse of this hymn begins with a Hebrew letter forming an acrostic, the words Shlomo Hazak, Solomon the Mighty. The blue streams in the video connect the letters of the acrostic and draw a complex graphic system reminiscent of falling rain. Next work is Lechado decoding. Lechado decoding, Let Us Go, My Beloved, is based on the text of famous hymn by Shlomo Halevi Al-Kabetz, the poet and Kabbalist Shlomo Halevi, who lived in Turkey and land of Israel in the 6th century. Was born into a family of Jews expelled from Spain. The hymn Lechado Di is dedicated to the meeting of Saturday. The poem is based on lines from the Talmud. Rabbi Hanina on the eve of the Shabbat said, "Let us go to meet the Queen Shabbat." Rabbi Yanai put on Shabbat clothes and said, "Come bride, come bride." The Shabbat in the hymn is represented by the bride. The Eten expresses the suffering of the Jewish people in exile, longing and hope for speedy deliverance. The Hadidi is included in the prayer books of all Jewish communities and is read during prayer before the onset of the Shabbat. Each verse of the hymn begins with a Hebrew letter forming an acrostic, the words Shlomo Alevi. The color of royal blue in Jewish tradition is associated with wisdom and the Shabbat. The blue jets in the video connect the letters of the acrostic and drew a complex graphic system reminiscent of sea waves. And last work in the series, the Hamavdil coding. Hamavdil coding, distinguishing between the holy and the everyday, is based on the text of the famous hymn of the medieval Jewish poet Isaac Katan, the Younger. The years of his life and place of birth are unknown, and nothing is known about where he lived. Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lehol tells about the complex structure of the world in which two sides simultaneously coexist, the mystical, divine, and the worldly, everyday. Each verse of this hymn begins with a Hebrew letter forming an acrostic. It's Katan. The mystical mood of the work is created using the color violet, a symbol of wisdom, maturity, and higher intelligence. Violet broken lines are constantly moving, connecting the letters of the acrostic and drawing a complex graphic system, forming a point at the top that resembles a pulsation beacon. Here you can see shows and events that I participated with these projects. For example, the group exhibition Art and Nomads, Multiple Horizons in Jerusalem Biennale, group exhibition Just Can Me, solo exhibition Period Coding. It will be in October this year. Color 2024 group exhibition in Seattle Museum in South Korea. Now it's a laser top. And the art and the word, this is Tashkent International Biennale in Uzbekistan. Thank you very much. And now we can see one part of this project's Shufat review.
So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for sharing your beautiful piece of your work. I'd love to say that during the recent Jerusalem Biennale, I also saw this project, and it is really it is a touching one. Thank you. And now I'd love to give the floor for the third speaker, Leor Ben-Guy. And Leor is a computational design and lecturer. He's specializing in custom interactive software for the live performances, installations, and web applications. Leor is a PhD candidate and a former lecturer at the Department of Computing at Goldsmiths, University of London. His work explores the vast space of emergent racial structures in the context of computational arts and artificial life. Leor, thank you.
Hello, thank you. I'm going to have to switch computers, so it'll be 45 seconds. Just a second. Hi, my name is Leor Ben-Guy, and I'm a computational designer. And today I'm going to talk to you a bit about my project, my PhD project, which I've been working on for the past more years than I'd like to admit. In a general sense, I think this project represents my best efforts to go as far as I can from physical reality, which nowadays seems even more appropriate than it used to. So just a little bit about me. As I said, I'm an artist, I'm a programmer, and I'm a designer, and I work in the spectrum along these kind of three headings. I'm also a PhD candidate at Goldsmiths, University of London, and I work as a software designer and developer at Fast Music Interactive here in Israel. So when I first started my master's degree at Goldsmiths, I came across this article by Christopher Langton from 1987. And he basically says, well, you can read it. There's nothing in its charter that restricts biology to the study of carbon-based life. It is simply that this is the only kind of life that has been available to study. And this allusion to this additional universe of possible other living forms, I found that quite mind-blowing. So I want to start with a short quiz for the people here in the room. One of these images was taken with a microscope, and one of these was taken with a satellite. In other words, one is very, very big, and the other one is very, very small. Can you guess which is which? Who says the left one is the big one?
The left one is a small one.
Left one is a small one. Anyone disagrees? Small? Anyone disagrees? Okay, you're right.
Okay, yeah. Where's the prize?
How about this one? Any guesses? Which one is the big one?
Left.
Left is big one, right is small one.
Yes.
Any disagrees? You disagree.
I disagree.
You disagree.
Yeah.
Okay, he was right.
Okay. 1-1.
How about this one?
Right is big.
Right is big. Disagree?
Disagree.
Disagree. You're right.
Oh.
Okay, last one, surprise one. Which one is the chip and which one is the factory that makes chips?
The left one is factory.
Left one is factory. No, you got it wrong. Okay, so why am I showing you this? I think it kind of gives you a hint that this idea that things in our physical world, they sort of collapse into certain forms and not other ones, and they tend to be consistent even regardless of massive differences in scale. And as a programmer, I found this very interesting, and I started to try and engage with ideas of form and morphology that are kind of related to living systems, but not necessarily. And so to give you an example from the living realm, we have something like a flock. And I think like this is a flock of starlings. They're sort of famous for their unique flocking behavior, but we've seen this before, and we see it in the motion of land animals and people and fish and birds. And it's a very particular kind of biological phenomenon. Now, in 1987, some other guy, Craig Reynolds, he formulated an algorithm that describes this particular phenomenon, this sort of swarming, flocking behavior, as the sum of three separate behaviors: separation, alignment, and cohesion. And when this behavior is fulfilled by each member of the group, you get this sort of emergent property of the group itself. And this is my explanation, at least like a bare bones explanation of what a complex system is. It's a system of interacting components. And sometimes systems like these, they have emergent properties, right? So properties that are apparent in the group, but not necessarily in the individuals. And so as a programmer, you can start to engage with this sort of phenomena, right? And you can start to create these sort of systems. And usually we see these sort of algorithms in sciences, right? We use emergent systems and we use nonlinear systems and algorithms that create these sort of things to simulate things that we see around us. But as an artist, I sort of thought, well, and obviously I'm not the only one, I sort of thought, well, we don't actually have to use them only for simulation. We could also just use them for emulating things, right? For creating novel things within virtual spaces. So as a master's student, this is what I started doing. I started creating very small software experiments that try to create phenomena, virtual phenomena that are associated with living systems, but not necessarily for the purpose of simulation, but just for the purpose of exploring novel emergent structures. So I'll give you a couple of examples. You can take a behavior like evolution. And this is a software experiment that lets people examine these sort of very primitive formations. And the longer you spend looking at something, the more likely it is to pass on its genetic structure, and you get a new generation that's composed of the properties of the ones that you spent more time looking. In other words, it gets more aesthetically appealing the longer you look at it. And of course, when you do a software experiment like this, sort of interactive evolutionary algorithm, there's a big question of what sort of phenomena you're creating. And there's no right answer, of course. I experimented with lots of different ideas. Eventually, it sort of collapsed into this sort of fictional microscope with fictional 3D characters, and it had a little button which you can move around them. And this was a part of my final exhibition. The point was that I measured the time people spent looking at each one and created the evolutionary process with it. And so this is how kind of each one looked like. And eventually, within the context of this fictional laboratory for exploration of living phenomena, you would get this genealogy of tiny organisms. Now, in themselves, they're not particularly interesting, but the evolutionary process that reacted to visitor engagement was a sort of, I think, the point here. So I'll give you a different example. We talked about swarm dynamics before, but if we're not aiming to simulate birds or fish or germs or people, we could just start experimenting with novel forms. And these are emergent structures. There are things that can move around and they can have various properties. This is an example of how I'm physically, like manually controlling different properties with these sliders, and each kind of change can causes a reaction that changes the behavior of the entire system. And they're quite flexible. When you're working with nonlinear systems like these, you can create quite dynamic structures that are there's sort of a balance between predictability and variety that you can get. This is an example from a performance in the Royal College in London from 2015, where this was also used as a sound reactive algorithm during live performance. So I'm not showing the sound here, but this is reacting to orchestral sounds that are going in the background. And this way, the algorithm is sort of just another character, creates a generative environment that contextualizes what the performers are doing. And as I said, you can get quite interesting formations like this, given that you're, again, not trying to simulate any particular thing, but just exploring the space of possible structures. And of course, this is something, obviously, they're all virtual phenomena, but you can still explore physicality. You can still explore like different scales and get different things. This is another example. I'll kind of brisk through this. Not so much a swarming algorithm, a slightly different algorithm that I experimented with at some point. It started with an experiment of just magnetic self-assembly. I was just trying to simulate basically what would happen if you threw a bunch of magnets in a bucket and how would they start interacting with each other. But when you do an experiment like this and throw 10,000 elements together, sometimes you're getting interesting things, right? You can see this moving one there in the background. It sort of started to self-assemble and almost to create this autonomous entity that moves around, and it bears almost some sort of agency. And when I saw this, this was obviously, I was quite mind-blown by this. And so I started a series of experiments that went on for, I think, a couple of months, where each night I would slightly tweak the parameters of the program, and I'll give it, it will sort of take all night for it to simmer. But in the morning, you'd wake up and you'd find this petri dish of all sorts of structures and all sorts of strategies for locomotion and different scales of things. And every time you tweak a few parameters, you get some sort of different behavior, as if you're creating this, feeding them something else, and they're kind of implicitly evolving into other forms. And here you can see a time lapse. There was like a big structure here, and it disassembled, and all of its parts kind of reassemble and then wander off. And this was a very, I think you can see it's quite reminiscent. If you've ever looked through a microscope, it does remind, is reminiscent of it in many ways. But you could also get very different things, right? This sort of megastructure with tentacles reaching out to simulate new members. And the differences between these different programs are very, very tiny, like just a few parameters or a floating point value. The whole program itself is also quite short, maybe like, I don't know, 10 or 20 lines of code, and you're getting this universe of phenomena. Another time lapse of two megastructures kind of reaching out and assimilating each other. So again, just to reiterate, a complex system in a very basic sense, it's a system of interacting components. Let's look at a different algorithm called cellular automata. Just again, a minute and a half of what cellular automata is. If you think of a grid of cells, right? I'll show you this presentation before, because again, experimenting with these kind of algorithms, I found it quite mind-blowing. This is maybe a single line of code and was able to produce these mega cities of structures with pipes running through them. And I think, like, I saw a hidden potential here for exploration of a vast space of possibility. So let's talk a little bit about what cellular automata is. If we think about static images, like that we take a picture with our phone, then each pixel has a particular color, and that's the color of the pixel, and that's the image that we get. But with cellular automata, it's not a static image. Each pixel would look around its adjacent neighbors and say, okay, you're this color, you're this color, you're this color, so I'm going to be that color. And this is happening for every pixel at every frame. Again, a system of interacting components, which leads to feedback and emergent structures. And like cellular automata, I won't get into the history, but it has a long history of in computing. It's one of the first computational models to feature an emergent system, a complex system. Three very famous algorithms in cellular automata: elementary automata by Stephen Wolfram, who did a comprehensive research from the 80s onwards; Conway's game of life, which primarily led to the popularization of cellular automata outside of academia; and reaction diffusion, not exactly a cellular automata, we'll talk a bit about this, but a simulation of a chemical, of how two chemicals diffuse into one another. And beyond these three algorithms that have been discovered and rigorously studied, there are, of course, many more, but not that many. And I think part of the issue that I saw was, okay, we have, I don't know, 200 known algorithms of cellular automata, but where's all the other ones? There are infinitely many. There must be, within this vast space of algorithms, many, many more. And so my project started exploring new ways of exploration of novel cellular automata algorithms. And basically the approach would go something like this. I sort of created a functional programming syntax. It's basically just saying I didn't use a general purpose programming language. I used something that's much more mathematical to describe these algorithms. And then once you have this sort of syntax, what's unique about it is that you can change any operator or parameter and you're getting something else. Maybe interesting, usually very, very not interesting, but it's something else. And it gives you sort of a method which you can use to start exploring novel algorithms. And using these methods, I was able to cover many, many more variations of famous algorithms. Here's just a handful of variations to Conway's game of life. And of course, you could argue that none of these are as interesting. They're probably not, but they are novel variations. They're actually novel, complex systems that no one's ever seen before and which were very easy to uncover. And so I started exploring and I started creating software implementations and novel tools that would allow me to discover new algorithms. And with each iteration of my tool, I just kept discovering more and more new behaviors. And again, these are algorithms that are they are essentially complex systems. They're very, very hard to predict, if not impossible. And no one essentially knows what else is out there, what kind of behaviors these things are capable of. So this is a sort of visual programming language that I tried to experiment with for a bit. And you can see that I'm changing parameters in real time, and I'm getting different kinds of behaviors from this change. And the question and the challenge here was, how can I keep exploring them and how can I maximize my exposure? How can I explore more and more algorithms? That was the purpose. So I kept developing with more and more tools. I'm kind of summarizing years of iterative processes of creating tools. And the tools kept advancing and I kept discovering more ways of generating algorithms from scratch and random algorithms. And, kind of a tedious process where you just sift through a bunch of random algorithms, but then sometimes you'd find something that's interesting. And then you can tweak that thing and maybe get interesting behaviors out of it. And the goal was essentially to create this archive, this huge space of possible new cellular automata algorithms. At a certain point, I read the story by Borges. It's called The Library of Babel, and it basically describes this a very short story, which describes the space of all possible books of a very strict given format. And it was reminiscent of kind of my research, which was very Sisyphic in nature. And essentially, the project became not the Library of Babel, where you'd explore a space of possible books, but the Laboratory of Babel, where I would explore the space of all possible cellular automata algorithms. And so if I try to summarize my PhD thesis in a single sentence, it would kind of go like this. There are countless possible cellular automata algorithms. Almost all of them are completely useless. Let's explore them anyway. Here are some methods. That was basically what my PhD is about. But as I said, the tools kept progressing. Essentially, at a certain point, it became this visual programming language. Here you can see a literal implementation of Conway's game of life, but the system was also very effective in allowing me to create this sort of laboratory where I would explore novel algorithms and compare them to each other and analyze them. And as the tools kept progressing, there was sort of a sense that I'm getting further and further away from being a programmer and something a bit more like a farmer, right? Because try and think of this process where you come up with a new algorithm and say, okay, that's interesting. But then, okay, let's look at a bunch of variations to that particular algorithm. And you move a bit to the side and you discover some other algorithm. And again, I'm not so much programming them as I am kind of putting them side by side and selecting them, again, a bit like a farmer. And this one's interesting. And oh, you go a bit to the side and you discover this universe of emergent patterns that go off and collide with each other and form these interesting structures. And each algorithm, if you go far enough into it, you discover that it has these unique properties and it's capable of creating almost like these ecosystems of emergent behaviors, each one worthy of, probably a complete taxonomical research. And it really becomes very specific at a certain point. So you find this algorithm and then you tweak it a little bit and go off to the side and select its sibling algorithm. And, here they're different, but also kind of reminiscent because the algorithms themselves are quite similar. And you try and zoom out kind of from these behaviors, and you discover that they're just surrounded by multitudes of variants that are somehow reminiscent, and each one with their unique properties. And again, it becomes quite specific at a certain point. I've now created a massive collection of hundreds of algorithms, and it becomes from this project of programming to this project of how do you start archiving them? How do you start exploring them? How do you select which ones are interesting out of the probably millions that I've seen over the past 9 years? It raises interesting questions in regards to exploration of emergent phenomena. And I haven't even gone into discussing, the potential value, intrinsic or extrinsic, of these algorithms. And so, here we are with these massive collections of algorithms. And after years of exploring them and really honestly just sitting in front of my computer nights on end and kind of collecting them and studying them and analyzing them, the question of what to do with these things kind of remains. But I think the project itself still has value in how it explores emergent phenomena, because I think a lot of these tools can be converted to other algorithms and to other algorithmic domains. And by now, my connection to these algorithms are, again, not so much as a programmer, but they almost became like this genetic code, because they are these algorithms themselves are like binary expression trees, much more like a genetic structure of a complex system. And I've also experimented with kind of explicitly evolving them. This is an interactive evolutionary algorithm, as we've seen before, but this time not with simple geometric structures, but with entire cellular automata algorithms. So yeah, I'll conclude with my latest discovery. This is a family of algorithms that I call type U. They sort of start with random noise, but very quickly they solve themselves into particular structures. And this is an immensely large family of algorithm with millions of members, and each one quite different and quite unique. And when you start really methodically exploring them, you can see that they have these very large diversities, and some of them are turbulent and organic, and some other ones are very much rigid, almost like these. Let's go here, almost like these conveyor belts along factory lines. And again, in any scale you look at them, they reveal interesting emergent patterns. And so, yeah, veering towards the end of this presentation, of course, it raises the question of what does one do with this project? And honestly, after giving it much thought over the last few years, I think the best thing I can do with it is to just keep exploring. And I've rarely stopped to think about how do I, what are the practical applications of these things? And I think the point is that these are vast spaces of algorithmic beauty and potential value. And I think the act of exploring these spaces, I think, in itself has merit. And so I'm going to keep exploring them, and we'll just have to see what happens next. Just to conclude, hold on, I'm just finished. Where's my cursor? Yes, I can show you my latest software if it loads. Let's look at it here. So this is a piece of software that I created, which allows one to physically scroll through the space of algorithms. So this is a space of type U, of very particular type U algorithms, but the point is that you could just keep moving alongside. And I think the challenge with creating such a system is creating it in a way that they're distributed so that each two neighboring algorithms are also kind of phenotypically similar. So, right, you can see that obviously there are changes, but there is some connection between neighboring algorithms. And I could kind of randomize it and go to a completely different region of the space and go, and you'd see basically similar behavior wherever you go. So kind of creating pockets of interesting behaviors or similar behaviors as a tool for exploration could have potential value in exploration of novel algorithms. And of course, this tool allows us to explore, not so much invent new algorithms, but to just visit a space where all of them exist and then just wander and get lost in it. So yeah, I'm going to keep getting lost. I hope I've inspired others to get lost in their own universes of creations as well. And thank you. We had a question. So.
How do we differentiate between noise and structure?
That's a big question. It's a very big question because the simple answer is I'll know it when I see it is an answer that was given before in many contexts in artificial life, but I'm mostly relying on my visual perception. Now, things when you explore these algorithms, oftentimes they start off with noise and then they kind of assemble into various structures. So I'm very much moved by intuition so far. There are what's the word? Quantitative ways of differentiating between noisy things and structure. For instance, you could use a compression algorithm, right? So if an image is very hard to compress, you'd say it's very noisy. And if an image is very easy to compress, you'd say it's very organized, right? Ordered. But if it's somewhere in between, then it's kind of structured. So this is an example of a quantitative method. And by the way, one of the analysis tools here does quantify it here. I won't show it. Like if I select this one, for example, I can run an analysis and it gives you sort of these numerical properties of the system. But to be honest, this is very much a novel thing. My analysis has been mostly guided by my intuition of what's interesting for me and where do I see interesting structures emerging. So I'm very much guided by intuition so far, at least. Thank you.
So super, it was really, it was a real inspiration.
Thank you.
Just to keep it. Yeah, I think, yeah, we can just divide it in yeah, because I'd love to ask you, to maybe just not to have, like a type of like questions and answers, but maybe a kind of conversation, because we're here today to talk about generative art and algorithms and ideas and inspiration, and also about intuition. So like my first question is like about inspiration. Just could you share with us when you're like starting new projects, where you're finding that I don't know, where your feelings are leading you? Where's like the point of inspiration for a pure project
Yes. When I became interested in ancient Hebrew poetry, I wanted to introduce it to the modern world. The origins of this work were the principles of the composer Igor Stravinsky, in particular his theory of synesthetics. In my work on period coding, I went further by not only color and music, like did Igor Stravinsky, but also poetry, animation, and video. So it's important for me in this project, my newest project.
So it's fascinating. It's like it's more sensors and to make it as sensitive and as alive as possible.
Yes, I wanted to work together with this music, with poetry, with coding, with animation video, and for me it's very interesting because I work with programmer, my husband, Alex Chuck, and this work, very hard work. It's we work together maybe 9 months, and was not easy, but now I'm very glad that I can introduce it in South Korea, in Uzbekistan, in other place, and to introduce our poetry and medieval poetry to all the world.
So it's very it's about sharing. It's also about spreading, and art is a way is a form of communication. So maybe you have some questions to Lila? Okay, if no, we can continue. Nimrod, maybe just Galina told me that you have a great knowledge in history of generative art. And so the question is, could we use this knowledge to predict the future, just to predict how it's going to change in the future? I'm not only talking about like topics and tools and algorithms and different way of interaction, communication, and creating, but just in general, just from your point of view, just what is it possible to add something new to make it even more complicated?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, first of all, this is really exciting, like to be here in Jerusalem. It's like such a variety of works that all kind of interface with this idea of generative art in really super different ways. So it's really interesting that I think it's already kind of, in a process of unpredictable evolution and change. Yeah, I mean, I think that we were talking about this a little bit earlier, Lior and I, about kind of this definition of generative art. It's a generative definition. So not only that the art generates itself, but the idea itself of an art generating itself is a generative idea. And it exists in computer arts and the way that they were kind of quickly introduced here, in the 60s and 70s, but you can also conceive of many other different things as a kind of generative practices or generative art. And I think that what I would say here, or what I'm interested in thinking about, is I think our history is right now we're seeing that many things that we thought are in the kind of realm of abstract existence or science fiction are kind of manifesting, and we are realizing that actually they are already here. So I'm kind of, I don't know, tempted to think about we imagine these aliens that would come from somewhere and would extract things from the earth, and actually we realize it's us. So I'm kind of tempted to hear that, to think about, the things that we are recognizing, or these patterns, or these kind of like life forms, or these sort of biological formations that we see evolving, that they actually kind of like, that they do exist and they are informed by something that we are kind of like not yet sort of tuned, or our perception is kind of like not there yet to kind of articulate, but it's kind of like an existence that we will find out and sort of ossify from this kind of currently abstract things that we're seeing. So I think it's and also I want to say that just on a kind of a very physical way, processing or computation is not possible without quantum physics, right? Because something cannot be like conductive and not conductive at the same time. So there is always just a probability and not a certainty that a certain calculation will result in the same result over and over again. So in that sense, the possibilities are kind of endless.
So could we say it's a kind of quantum magic?
I mean, yeah, it is like very kind of in a very like physical, sort of like scientific way. It is quantum magic.
Sorry, but it's like, in your work he was showing, and he was telling us that it was like 9 years, and he's not going to stop because he has that huge inspiration, and he's like looking for new ways, I don't know, to explore, to work with algorithms. And this was like there was like so many energy and inspiration. So I thought about magic. That's why I was talking about that. But could you please tell us what is like your what is pushing you forward? What is giving you this energy? It's like it's research itself, or you have the idea, you're looking for something, you're searching for something, and maybe you have something in your mind that you're looking for in all the algorithms.
So it's hard to say that I have something in my mind. I think it's very true in generative design, and even more so when you talk about complex systems, that you can't even begin to try and think about the thing and then create it. These systems are so unpredictable that you have to take a step back. And so I guess a good way of saying it, and again, very true for generative design, it's not like a composer creating a musical composition. We're creating the composer. And so the properties of the composer could be very, very different from the property of the actual composition that you get. And so to the question of what drives me, I think it's sort of a co-evolution between tools and algorithms and the things that I kind of the work, the tools that I use to create these systems, and having some sort of vision of again, not so much what I want to achieve, but the sort of space that I want to explore. And so for me, I think it's this kind of co-evolution, and I keep getting better and better with working, just with programming and creating these tools and kind of inventing my own tools for exploration. And as these tools are evolving, I'm also getting exposed to novel realms in which I can explore. And so because this process feeds, there's kind of two different systems that feed each other, it does create, on the one hand, a lot of drive. And I'm very still, even after, I'm still very much moved by these works. And I think emotionally I connect with it. There's also a downside to this. It's a very specific process. It never ends. I'm never satisfied. And so I think it just keeps going. I think when I try to think about the beautiful part of artificial life, and the prospect of discovering novel life forms, it doesn't matter if they're actually considered life. I don't actually care if they're considered alive or not. It's novel emergent phenomena. But I think, if we know the story of Antony van Leeuwenhoek, do we know him? He was sort of this fabric tradesman and lens hobbyist from the 17th century. And one day he created a very cool lens, a spherical lens of his own design, because he wanted to get a closer look at his merchandise, at his fabrics. And then he started looking at other things, and he started seeing these tiny animals everywhere. And he basically became the first microbiologist. And so it's not that these things started existing once he discovered them, they were there all along. And this really connects to what Mimor just said, it's these phenomena, these possible futures, these things that we keep discovering, I don't consider them as inventions so much as possible combinations that we can try and open windows to. And I think computation is capable of creating these windows to these realms. And I think it's visible in all three works that we've seen today, that these are kind of avenues to these spaces of new things that have their own agency. So yeah, it still drives me.
I got it. It's like it's increasing our level of our ability of perception, of connection, of communication, of everything.
It widens our scope of what's accessible to us.
What accessible, yeah. And it's showing us that the form of life might be any kind of form, and it's beautiful. And it's it's like there is it's like eternity. It's like you don't have to stop, because there's always going to be something new, and there is always a room for it's not a miracle, it's always a room for new knowledge, we can say that. But do we have enough I don't know. No.
I'm kidding, sorry.
No, I was interested if we are ready to understand what we're seeing, when we're getting this algorithm and this new knowledge. Are we like really do have enough information to be able to understand like what we're seeing that we know? It's like, is it what kind of insect it is?
It's a good question. I've had demonstrations where I've shown people parts of the software, and then okay, it's time to go, and you want to close the program, and I've had people react, no, don't kill them. So in a sense, I think we are projecting a lot of what we do know onto these abstract entities. So it's only human.
Yeah, but then at the same time, you discover that so many things that we didn't consider to have agency are actually agential, parts of this world, things like rocks, or so that they actually do have some, something that they are doing. So yeah, it goes both ways.
With the rocks, algorithms. So maybe you have something to add. Maybe you'd like to sum up to our Yes, no. No. Would you like to? Thank you so much. I hope it was fascinating, and we inspired you to, I don't know, just to get to know something new about these words in art.
Guys, that was great for me. I'm very impressed. And as I see, generative art is non-stoppable art. This is non-stop and always random. And I think our meeting today turned out to be interesting. A huge thanks to our wonderful speakers. Thank you, Nimrod, thank you, Lilia, thank you, Lior, for very interesting presentations. And I would like to organize a joint exhibition of generative art. It will be a great idea. I think, let's think about it. Thanks also to our permanent moderator, Daria Kesler. Yes, she always adds a special charm and appeal to our meetings. Once again, thank you to CYLAND and Adam to their cooperation and help in organizing our meetings. And of course, thanks to the Leonardo Laser Talks platform for the opportunity to work within a creative community and share our ideas with the whole world. Until our next meetings, thank you. Bye-bye.